So when I first started doing my podcast, I would go to conventions with my equipment and I would interview people on live camera, on LinkedIn and YouTube, and then turn it into a podcast. And that made people really nervous having cameras on them in person, being around me. They'd never met me. Their friends are watching them at a trade show. So I would do a similar version, tell me about something that makes you smile unrelated to work, or kind of, throw in something personal into them that makes them at ease, and then talking about that for 3 or 4 minutes.
I create clear thinking and decisive leaders who can amplify their influence. Contact me to find out how I can help you or your organisation. And today our guest is Peter Murphy Lewis. How are you doing?
Wonderful. Excited to be here. Excited to chat with you.
Brilliant. Peter, do you have like a favourite candy you like to eat?
It's funny you ask, because the other day I was talking with my parents and my wife about how much we hate candy corn. We're almost to Thanksgiving and there's a whole bunch of candy corn in the United States. We talked about what we disliked more than what we liked. My favorite candy has to be hot tamales.
Right, so that's 2 things I have no idea. So I'm sitting there Googling candy corn. Okay, I figured that out. I see that. And what was the other thing that you mentioned?
Hot tamales.
No
They're
idea.
like a fluorescent red, feels spicy, but has sugar in it. Been around for probably 30 years, I'm guessing, at least.
Oh my. Peter, can you tell me a bit more about you?
Yeah, I wear a couple different hats. I'll start off with the most important. Husband to a beautiful woman from South America, dad of an 8-year-old who was born in South America. We live inside of a zoo. I'm not joking. I will leave a second or two of silence to let that sink in. We live inside of a zoo in the middle of Wichita, Kansas. Professionally, the hats that pay the bills, I'm a documentarian, I'm a TV host, and I'm a fractional CMO. So I help CEOs who do not want to run their marketing department make money off their marketing.
Okay, right. So there's lots to unpick there. First of all, a zoo. Is it a zoo that's still commercially run, or is it just an old zoo?
I've never got that question. That's really good. That brought a lot of images to my mind of like walking around this zoo with some animals that, 20 years ago lived in a pen and got escaped because nobody took care of them and they had to kind of, fend for themselves. Yeah, it's a real zoo, rather a new zoo. It started off as a breeding facility for exotic animals and endangered animals in the early 90s. And then the son of this amazing breeder told his dad, hey, we have so many school groups visiting us. Why don't we open this up to the public? We have beautiful animals. We take care of them better than anyone in the country. Let's let the public see these beautiful animals. And so it's been open for about 14 years. And I was asked to take over the marketing department as a chief strategist about 5 years ago. And they offered me a house inside the zoo. I was living in South America at the time. And I told my wife, I said, you want to live in the US inside of the zoo? And she bought a plane ticket. And here we are.
Sounds beyond coolness. Do you know that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can imagine for an 8-year-old, it's really cool for him. But now I know I can't ever leave because he's never going to be happy with any other decision I make in life once I pull him from the zoo.
You know what? That is true. You are trapped, actually, because you will become the father that took him away from the animals and stuck him in a concrete zoo, a concrete jungle.
Yeah.
Paying his therapist fees for the next 30 years.
Definitely.
All right, then. So I'm also curious about how you are doing all these things. So you've got Simo, TV show, and there was something else.
Documentary.
Documentary, yeah. What sort of documentaries do you do?
I just produced and host my first one. It's a cool story because it was a documentary that I pitched to a healthcare association when at the time I was VP of marketing in a healthcare company. So the pitch was, hey, I know how to do TV shows. Why don't I do a documentary about the healthcare people and help out with the staffing crisis? And then my company will help sponsor it because it'll grow their brand. Well, that company sold successfully. It was great. It's what we wanted to do. It was the intention I got into the job. But the next company said, we don't want to do the documentary. It was a good idea, but we're not into it. And so I told the Healthcare Association, I think I can do it on my own. And I did it on my own. I did it with a right-hand woman who's the kind of the director of my TV show. And we just replicated what we had done in the TV show, which is telling people story about what they do and what they're in love with and what they are passionate about in life, but through my questions. So I'm kind of the humble, dumb guy in the room who asks people to show me what they do day to day and try to make it interesting. I explain it to people as it's a cross between Mike Rowe's Dirty Jobs show and Anthony Bourdain, No Reservations. So it's got the sociological component of Anthony Bourdain, and it's got the active kind of curious, let me get my hands dirty of Mike Rowe.
Okay, your coolness status is continuing to increase, by the way. It sounds excellent. So I'm curious then about your insights on developing leadership skills that can lead to innovation or foster innovation, because clearly you're showing quite an innovative view of things. So tell me your thoughts on that.
It's a big question. We have some time to unravel it, I hope. I don't have a perfect answer, but what I would say is that it starts with a foundation of trust and then kind of a close cousin of trust, autonomy, and then a close cousin of that, which is transparency. I think kind of those three pillars make for at least the success that my team and I have started to create so far.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so one of the things that I've noticed is that leaders tend to struggle a lot with transparency. How do you make that work?
Ooh, that one. I don't know if I know any different. I'll try to give some examples of not knowing any different and kind of how I grew into that. I think I should give a little bit of context. My parents are amazing. My parents have been some of my closest friends for almost my entire life. I went to a boarding house school when I was 14. So at the age of 14, my parents quit being my parents and they became kind of like a mentor because my parents were my residential advisors. They were the people who were telling me to make my bed at boarding school, right? So my parents no longer had to be the law. My parents could be these wise family members who are looking out for me. And that relationship transformed who I am. And they've always been transparent. My parents have talked about money in front of me. My parents have disagreed in front of me. My parents have never told me what to do. There's only one thing that my dad told me not to do, and he told me not to be an attorney because he'd never met an attorney who likes what they're doing. But other than that, they told me I could do anything that I wanted. And so kind of that kind of freedom and autonomy grew into me moving to South America right when I got out of undergrad to Chile, where I started my own travel company that kind of blew up and grew really, really quickly. So at the age of 27, I owned my own travel company that was already in the New York Times, that had, famous customers like Paul McCartney and Aerosmith and Beyonce. And at 27 years old, I'd never taken a business class in my life. Today, I've still never taken a business class. Like a P&L, I'm better off using ChatGPT for my P&L than me running it. That doesn't mean I don't understand it. I just never had that foundation. And that starting my own company when I was 27 years old, I don't know if there's any way to run it other than transparency, because you can't fake it to make it in front of your team. And my parents never really faked it to make it. So that's the long-winded answer of how I did that organically. I'm happy to dive into some details of how I've turned that into more of a systematic approach today, because now I'm 44. I do approach it intentionally, but 20 years ago when I started, I didn't know what I was doing.
I don't think anybody really knows what they're doing. And those that do know what they're doing don't do it well.
That's fair.
Not to begin with, because I think, as much learning that you can get from books and everything, it's not the same And often the information you get from books and stuff work really well for massive companies, but they're not necessarily directly applicable to smaller companies. So your travel company, how did you manage to get it to be visited by so many famous people so quickly?
I think it's probably the skill set that I still have today. So today it's called digital public relations. Back then it was growth hacking the digital channels to make ourselves stand out. Back then, we're talking about 2007 when we started the travel company. I think we were probably the only travel company back then that had an optimized website that was updated, at least every 2 weeks with new pictures and blogs. We were number one in TripAdvisor, so we were growth hacking Google reviews. When the hotels would not let us into their concierge system because they worked heavily off of commission, we growth hacked that by every single customer who took a tour with us. We were doing, city bicycle tours and bike and wine tours and walking tours. Every person who came to our company and did a tour and was happy, we would say, hey, your hotel won't recommend us. Will you take these flyers back and pass it out to people at dinner and at the bar and at breakfast and leave it scattered around the tables? And so we were flipping the tourism model on its head through digital and through person-to-person word of mouth. And that made us trendy. We were controversial. The first tours we were doing were political tours and cultural tours and sociological tours. Chile had a a dictatorship in the 70s and 80s and early 90s, and we were talking about those in the tours. And none of the Chileans wanted to talk about that, but every foreigner who came there wanted to talk about it. It'd be like if I went to Berlin and they wouldn't talk to me about World War II. Well, that's what it was like in Chile in 2007. No one would let us talk about the elephant in the room, and we were the only people doing it. So New York Times was the first big international publication to follow us. And then the W Hotel started to recommend us because we were trendy, and so were they. And then our first big client was Beyonce. The W Hotel called me and said, hey, we have a VIP client in town. She wants you to do a private tour for 20 people in her entourage. Can you be here in 2 hours with bicycles? And I called my dad and said, Dad, I think it's Beyonce because she's in town and I know she's staying at the W. Do you want to go to this bicycle tour with me? And he said, yeah. And so from New York Times to Beyonce, and then it domino effect, Aerosmith came in our office and Paul McCartney twice. So I think it was, to answer more succinctly, sorry for the long-winded, digital PR.
Yeah, and I think it's about, from what you're saying, is that you're getting a satisfied customer to do the marketing for you, which was certainly very, very different back then, but it's very applicable now. Let's listen to a quick advert.
As a leader, you know that having a strong level of influence is essential to achieving your goals. But how do you know if you're truly making an impact? Take the How Influential Are You scorecard to get a clear picture of your current level of influence and identify areas for improvement. With personalised recommendations and valuable strategies, you'll be able to amplify your influence and make a real difference as a leader. Don't miss this opportunity to improve your leadership skills. Take the scorecard now at amplifyyourinfluence.scoreapp.com. Welcome back to the Maverick Paradox. This is the podcast for the pathologically curious.
I understand that you see podcasting as a way of building thought leadership. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, the way that I approach it is I think that everybody can write if they want to, especially in the AI world. So people have been focused on SEO for 15 years heavily, and SEO is not dead, but it's struggling. But people want to fall in love with people in my experience, or at least it's a lot less inexpensive way to do marketing. And definitely you don't have to spend as much money on advertising. And if you have a voice and you have an opinion and you know how to listen, and you know how to say what you think succinctly, unlike me in this instance. Podcast is a great place because you are getting into someone's mind through their headphones. You're in between their two ears, and you're able to share, thought-provoking ideas, and then they will remember you, or they'll remember some clip. It's kind of like, like I have a bunch of quotes that I remember from my mom saying, or quotes from favorite books of mine and how they've had an impact on me. I think that it's easier to do that through podcasts than almost any other media today. Obviously, if you're a keynote speaker in convention, that helps, but you often what you learn at a convention, you only take 5% home with you. That person, if they don't have a podcast, you might never hear them again. A podcast, you hear them over and over and over again. As someone who hears your voice, your curiosity, Judith, you've penetrated people's approach to business, marketing, innovation, because the way that you ask questions and the way that you bring on guests. And I think that podcast has disrupted traditional media. You look at the US election, you can't even imagine a year ago any US presidential candidate considering a podcast. And now Harris and Trump did every important podcast in the country. And podcast is huge.
And do you think when you are building that thought leadership, you should do video only or audio only or both? Or what do you think is the best way?
So I think it depends on your channel. When I first started my podcast in the healthcare space, it was audio, 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 audio. When that podcast kind of moved into a younger generation, I started focus on frontline caregivers. Then I knew that, that younger 25-year-old might not ever discover me on a podcast. So then I started doing live streams on YouTube with that. So I think it probably depends on your demographic. For me, my clientele, my type of client is a 45-year-old CEO, LinkedIn, and podcasts. So it probably doesn't really matter in my case.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks for sharing all that. I think thinking about the demographics is really important. So I know for this podcast, a lot of people listen on their way to work and things like that. And I noticed that when COVID happened, the listenership dropped substantially when people were locked in and not going to work. But the magazine readership went up. So it's like I lost people listening, but they all started reading.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're right, because I think there are times when I do video ones as well, but not instead of.
Yes. Kind of piggybacking off that, I found that I've had more things go viral, and I mean viral, get booked calls or grow my brand, or people reach out to me, not in terms of impressions, from even just repurposing a quote from a podcast on LinkedIn or on social media. So sometimes people will take, you'll ask an interesting question, which will cause me to think about it in an interesting way. And then I'll reflect upon that in a long format post on LinkedIn. And that will actually convert better than the video, or maybe even the podcast being between two people's ears. But without the podcast, I probably wouldn't have been, triggered or inspired to have the answer. I mean, it's an organic conversation. You and I've never met before. So there's things that are going to come from this conversation that I wouldn't be able to dream up on my own on LinkedIn.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that's right.
I used to write down things while I was either doing an interview, like in your seat, or when I was the guest. And I got too distracted. And I said, come on, just put it into an AI tool and take out the best clips afterwards. Concentrate on the moment.
Exactly. It is. It's all about concentrating on the moment. So I can totally understand what you're saying, especially with your expertise as a marketer, and then looking at the podcast. Is there a certain way on doing the podcast, either as a guest or as a host, that can build that thought leadership in people's minds?
I think as a host point of view, I think you have a perfect 10 dismount, right? Like had no idea what your first question was going to be. I'd listened to a couple of your interviews. I thought there might be something about journey or something about a book. But you made me at ease by throwing a question that I couldn't prepare for. So I really liked that approach. I did something similar when I was doing live streams. So when I first started doing my podcast, I would go to conventions with my equipment and I would interview people on live camera, on LinkedIn and YouTube, and then turn it into a podcast. And that made people really nervous, having cameras on them in person, being around me. They'd never met me. Their friends are watching them at a trade show. So I would do a similar version, tell me about something that makes you smile unrelated to work, or kind of, throw in something personal into them that makes them at ease, and then talking about that for 3 or 4 minutes. You and I talked about candy for 3 or 4 minutes. As a guest, I just think authenticity, vulnerability are things that you just have to remember. And then if you want to get a little bit tactical, kind of like the example of your favorite candy, the tactical, I think, thing that matters is being comfortable with silence, right? Like there's a chance you're going to ask me another question or two in this chat and I don't know how to answer it, and just be really comfortable and say, and then sit with the silence. But I don't do that intentional. It's just getting comfortable, because most of life we're taught that you should fill up the space and you sound stupid if you don't know the answer. I think from a podcast point of view, if people fall in love with your voice and who you are, and you're being honest, then you shouldn't fake it.
Yeah, I totally get it. I remember being on a panel, and I got asked a question, and it was a difficult question, and I paused for a moment to think it through, and then I responded. And then afterwards, I did the usual kind of in my head, oh my gosh, how long was that pause? But what I found afterwards, when I was speaking to people who were at the event, they were like, oh, I love the way that you came across so considered, and the way you thought. And there's me like thinking, oh my gosh, that's probably the world's longest pause. But in reality, it's not. It's just that it feels that way in the moment.
Yeah.
So I think that's quite funny. All right, then. Okay, that makes sense. I would probably add, in terms of guesting on podcasts, is that, especially for those that have only just started, is to think about what is it that you want to get across. Like, what's your 3 things that you want to get across, and some of the basics, like being able to define what it is that you do. Because I think sometimes when you ask somebody what do, they may take 5 minutes to tell you, which is fine in a conversation, but it's harder on a podcast.
I agree with that. I saw a video on YouTube about a week or 2 ago, and I don't know who it is to give them credit, mainly because the algorithm puts interesting things in front of me based around my interest, not around the people. And kind of, I think it's similar to what you said, which is think about frameworks that other people understand so they can understand your messaging, right? Like if be able to say what you do so that they can understand it as well, right? Like my wife and I, every year we go back to couples counseling for 2 to 3 to 4 sessions. And it's mainly because one of us doesn't know how to translate to the other what we feel or what we need to say. It's not that we don't know how to communicate. We don't know how to speak in the other person's framework sometimes.
Oh, that's so interesting. So you just do that as a regular thing?
No, usually when it comes to a point where I would say, let's say that we have, I'd say 9 serious discussions per year, meaning it's a 45-minute to an hour conversation where we're talking about, we're frustrated by this, or I need more of you from this, or I need you to be more present, or, whatever's going on. And of those 9, there's one that we can't break through it on our own. We're missing one tool. We have the hammer, we have the axe, we have the screwdriver, but in this instance, we might be missing the drill. We don't know where we put it in the closet. So and we'll know after like an hour and 15 minutes if we're just keep not hearing each other. And we'll say, let's sit on this for a couple days. And if we still can't find the drill, let's call up Marcella. Marcella has been our couples therapist since we've met, going on almost 15 years. and we'll say, hey, Marcella, we've had this serious conversation. Can we come back to you? We think you'll help us find the drill. And we'll go to 1 to max 3 sessions, and we'll find the drill, and she'll send us off on our own again to continue flying, and we can come back to the nest when we're struggling.
No, I love that. I like that openness and transparency as well. And I guess if it's something that you do, every year or so, then it doesn't feel forced or that there's any like real issue that's not being raised. So I guess you get to catch stuff, but it's also kind of honoring the other person by saying that you're that important to me that I'm going to do something that's uncomfortable because I think it's good for us. I think that says a lot about the two of you.
I find that, like I used to explain therapy. I started going to therapy when I was 19 years from some serious depression and ideation issues that I need to work on. And I used to explain therapy to people who didn't understand it as going to the gym. It's just working on your mind. Now there's, people are much more open to mental health and therapy. So now that I, like my wife and I've done so much therapy, I say therapy is more like going on a cruise, right? My wife and I go to the gym psychologically together all year long. Once in a while, we need to take a break from the gym, and we need to connect in a different way other than doing squats or jumping on the treadmill, and we'll go to a cruise. And Marcella, in a way, is our cruise ship.
I like that. That's lovely. Before we,
I can't wait till she hears this. She's gonna cry laughing.
You're like, well, a cruise. She's actually going to ask for an actual cruise. She goes, right, I want to go on a cruise now. Before we end, I know that you said that you're a fractional marketing officer. How did you get into that? Did you just like approach a company and say, I can do this 1 day a week? Or I'm like, how did you get into it?
Oh, I think it's 2 things that I can think of right now. The first one is probably my own need to continue to focus on interesting challenges. I get bored if it's the same thing over and over. So the fractional CMO role is you come in, you engage intensively for 6 to 18 months, depending on what the problem is. That challenge, that problem, I love. I love helping people make money for themselves. And then so it's more out of boredom, keeps me challenged mentally. And then the second thing is I think that it just started with people saying, hey, you're solving this problem with a podcast for this enterprise SaaS company. I started a podcast. Can you tell me how I can do it? Or another person came to me and said, hey, I can see you're killing at conventions. Can you help me? And it mostly started off just kind of pro bono, helping people. And then people would say to me, hey, can you help me on the side? And I had this unique position. The private equity company that I was working for in 2020, the CEO told me, I don't really care what you do on the side. If you're meeting your quarterly goals and your annual goals, I don't care if you work 20 days a week. And at one point he told me, he said, I can give you a big fat raise, or I can, you can start taking Fridays off. What do you want? Well, of course I took Fridays off. My wife and I are frugal as can be. We live inside of a zoo. What else do I need out of life? I don't need a lot of money out of life. So took the free time, and that free time, instead of just sitting around, I started helping more people. So the first answer was boredom. I'm still a child inside. And then secondly is my boss gave me free time, and that free time meant that I started helping other people.
So how did you market yourself though as a CMO?
I think that I know what it is. I didn't think about this. The first thing that happened is I volunteered to do free consulting services on a really beautiful platform called growthmentor.com. And I don't make any money off of Growth Mentor. I'm not an owner or anything like that. And I started off with Growth Mentor as a paying mentee. I think I paid $50 a month back in 2019 or 2020. And then after I got so much benefit from the consultants who were helping me on there for free, they weren't getting paid. Platform was getting paid $50 a month. Then I applied to be a mentor to pay back. And to this day, I still take 1 or 2 calls per month as a mentee on Growth Mentor, and I give 3 to 6 hours per month as a mentor for free. And that translated into fractional CMO. People started to call me that. They're like, hey, you're not a freelance marketer. You're helping people with strategy. And then I started to realize one of my unique ways to negotiate my contracts with my clients was, hey, I can pay based off performance. So let's lower the risk for you. Pay me something minimal. If you renew my contract at 6 months or at 3 months, or we meet these goals, then you pay me a huge bonus. And that flexibility started translating into fractional CMO. I didn't know the wording at the beginning, because I don't actually know the space between a consultant and a freelancer and a fractional CMO. For me, it just means the fractional CMO has some skin in the game, and is involved in strategy, and feels like they're plugged into the business. Where I can't speak for consultants or freelancers, but I feel like there's a subtle difference there.
So in your CMO role, are you doing it for long periods at a time, or like full time for like so many months, or are you like, I'm there once or twice a week, every week?
The majority of my clients engage me for about 2 to 4 months of intense work, which is probably 20 hours a week. And then I disengage back to maybe 1 to 2 hours a week and continue to go to their marketing call and their leadership call. And then my agency has 15 people behind me. And those people, those amazing marketers who've been with me for almost 5 years, do the maintenance. So then they take over the execution of the marketing.
Oh, it's interesting. I've not heard it like that before. So I've heard of the fractional tending to be 1 or 2 days a week or something, as opposed to months at a time. I guess maybe in my head, the months at a time feels like consulting, and the 1 or 2 days a week feels like the fractional part.
So
Maybe
so. I think the other difference that I find from a fractional CMO point of view that clients reach out to me is they're interested in me creating the team for them. And they also, so they want me to either train up their team, or they want me to take someone from my team and leave it in place, or they want me to overtake their marketing for a little bit and then hire and set up a system inside and then disengage. And one of the things that one of the reasons they like this is because I'm the person who's involved with this. They'll keep me on for an hour a week. And then if that person quits at 9 months or quits at 1.5 years, all of the knowledge is still inside my mind. So they can just say, okay, Peter, can we ramp up your hours and you bring in another marketer? We need to scale, or we're going to go into Latin America. You already know the problem that we solved. Let's scale that.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Brilliant. All right then. So as we're wrapping up, is there one thing you would like to share?
I guess if there's anything that we've talked about that you feel that I can help you with, connect with me on LinkedIn or sign up for Growth Mentor. And I'd happy to help anyone. As you know, I don't do this for money. I told you that I'm frugal, so I'm happy to help. I give away hours of free pro bono strategy work. So reach out if you feel comfortable.
Brilliant. That's very generous of you to do that.
My pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on the show, Peter, and thank you out there for tuning in to the Maverick Paradox podcast. I'm Judith Germain, your host, and I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation.
The Maverick Paradox Magazine. The Maverick Paradox Magazine is for the pathologically curious. Written by a swagger of socialized mavericks who are divergent thinkers, the magazine tackles the biggest issues affecting maverick leaders today. You might be a business owner or a leader within an organization who wants to have your thinking challenged, to be exposed to a diversity of thought, or to learn from diverse experts in their fields. If so, the Maverick Paradox Magazine is for you. Join the swagger at themaverickparadox.com and engage in the conversation.